WordPress includes one very important feature that's going to let us build our app using WordPress as the backend. It's called the REST API. Um, and WordPress has included this since 2016. It was released in WordPress 4.7. And since its release, it's it's really expanded what you can do with WordPress. Most importantly, it's allowed you to create what is commonly called a headless CMS, which simply means that instead of having to use WordPress as your CMS and your front end to actually display your content to your end user, you can use WordPress as your CMS, but you can consume that data through the REST API within another app. So you're no longer bound to using the WordPress front end to display your content. You can display it in a web app built with React or Angular or Vue, or in our case, we're going to create a mobile application with that data. So this is all made possible because WordPress has introduced the REST API. So if you're not familiar with the concept of what a REST API is, REST is short for representational state transfer, and that just simply means it's a way for computers to pass data back and forth to each other. It's a standard. So it's a standardized way to represent data. In our case, blog content, post content, images, anything you want to manage in WordPress. It's going to give us a standardized way to transfer and access that data. Feel free to Google a little bit about REST APIs just to get familiar with the concept. But before you dive in to using the REST API, I would definitely suggest you head over here to the WordPress official documentation for the REST API. Just skim over it and kind of understand what the goals are with the REST API. You can there's some really good walkthroughs and tutorials here for how to use the REST API through WordPress. So now let's take a look at what WordPress REST API data looks like when you request it in the browser. So on my screen here, this is my WordPress post data. So when I make this request in this URL here, it's going to return to me the REST API data for my posts. Just to break down this URL a little bit, we are visiting withwp.app. That's the companion website for this course. So this is the base URL for this request. This path wp.json, this is where every REST API request is going to be made at this path with WordPress. Whether it's a custom endpoint that you added or through some plugin, or whether it's part of the built-in core REST API from WordPress, every REST API request is going to be made after this path, wp-json. After that, we have WP, which obviously stands for WordPress. This is called the namespace of the endpoint that I'm requesting. WP means that this is part of the standard out-of-the-box WordPress endpoints. If you add a custom endpoint later with custom code, like in a plugin, you can create your own namespace. But this just means that we're under the WordPress namespace, which every endpoint that's part of the standard REST API is going to be after this endpoint. So next you're going to see V2. That just means that we're dealing with version 2 of WordPress's API. That's the current version of the REST API, and so every new WordPress install ships with version 2 of the WordPress endpoints. After that is just posts. This is the endpoint itself. This just tells the REST API that you want to request all of your WordPress posts in this request. So looking at this data, you're going to see it's very nicely formatted for me. That's because I've installed this Chrome extension called JSON Formatter. I would highly recommend, if you don't already have this or a similar plugin, install it, because otherwise when you're dealing with the REST API, your data is going to look like this. It's very hard to read, so it's going to be worth your time. It's going to save you a lot of headache if you just install a plugin like this, and then you can see your REST data very nicely formatted like this. So just looking at this data, if you're familiar with WordPress at all, this should look very familiar. You'll see here, if I collapse this, I've got an array of 3 items here. That's because I've got 3 posts in this install currently. So this is going to correspond to those 3 posts. Each of those posts will be represented as an object here. You can see I've got the ID of the post, the date it was published, the date it was modified, the slug, the status it's published, just everything you would expect with that WordPress post data. If I go down a little bit further, you're going to start seeing the post content. Here you're going to see the title of this post. This one's called Modifying the REST API. Below that, you're going to see the content of this post. So this is the actual content of the post as it would be rendered to the screen if I requested it in the WordPress front end. So you can see it's got the HTML tags, it's got line breaks, so it's got everything I need to render this content the way I intend for my user to see it. Scrolling down a little bit further, you're just going to see some metadata and excerpt for the post. Now you're going to see here there's a couple of properties on this object that aren't included standard in the REST API, like ACF, which is added by the Advanced Custom Fields plugin, which we'll look at a little bit later. And this Yoast head property is added by the Yoast SEO plugin. So, if you're looking at just a fresh WordPress install, you're not going to see these properties. Nothing to worry about. We'll explain this ACF post, this ACF property a little bit later, but you don't have to worry about any of this other stuff. So, all the other posts in this collection are the same. Same deal. So this is what post data looks like in the REST API, and we'll go in deeper into how to actually use this data in your app in the upcoming videos.